Alright, now that Season 3 of The Mandalorian is finished, I'd like to go over it and basically redo it. The point of this is because I think there's a lot of improvement that can be had out of Season 3, but I also see a lot of potential from it. I didn't particularly dislike the season, and actually rather enjoyed it for the most part. There were some sticking points that, personally, I didn't like. We'll go over those, but overall, I think that this could be improved by having a rework to it and basically flipping a few things around. So, that's what I want to do today. Now, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that I'm going to be going back over The Mandalorian Season 3, and I'm going to be rearranging things, refocusing certain aspects, and basically trying to improve the storytelling portion of it so that the season is much more coherent and is overall improved. To this end, I have made 3 rules for myself. I will apply these to any rework I do, but I'll go over them at the beginning of each rework just to be sure. So, to begin, rule number 1 is the start and end points must be the same. That means I have to start on the same note that Mandalorian Season 3 started, and I have to end on the same note as Mandalorian Season 3 ended. That is to ensure that any overall plot lines do not get messed up. Rule number 2 is I am not allowed to change any other series in order to affect this one. That is a personal rule that I really don't necessarily like with this one, because, as many people have noted, there was 2 episodes of The Mandalorian in the Book of Boba Fett. Well, that's too bad. I have to accept that they exist, and I must work with them as they are. They are in a different series, and thus outside of the scope of this rework. Rule number 3 is the rules of the universe must be adhered to. Effectively speaking, I can't just invent a new Deus Ex Machina, or any new force powers or whatever, just to get away with what I want to do. I can only pull from existing material. Again, this is to ensure the integrity of the universe. The plan is not to ruin the major plot lines going on, but to ensure that this section of the plot line is much more well received. Now, obviously, I would like to be doing these reworks before this stuff comes out, so that these things could be better, but alas, I am a mere scrub like the rest of you, and don't have knowledge of this stuff ahead of time. Very sad, very sad. So, let's begin with kind of the major beats. First and foremost, I want to point out that I think the vast majority of fight scenes could do with a touch-up on their choreography. As it's just kind of a thing, I want to just leave it here. Overall, the fight choreography could be better polished. So yeah, just have a choreographer go back through it, cut down on some things, and improve some stuff. I'll go into more detail on particular fights or particular details as needed. But overall, just general improvements in that area. So next up is the armor. And I have a pretty big problem with the way the armorer fights. Specifically, I have a problem with the weapon she's taking into battle. Namely, they aren't weapons. She's taking forge tools. And sincerely, she's taking forge tools. She's got tongs and a hammer she uses to weld and to shape Beskar and all that, which she's now taking into battle. It makes some sense in Season 1 where she's in the forge and she's under a direct attack from an outside force. And okay, that's what she has there. But now she's leaving the forge and taking those tools with her. What happens if she dies under fire? Are there backup tools? Are you now suddenly unable to forge Beskar until you retrieve those tools? Which, if they've killed your armorer and driven you off, I'm not sure you're getting that stuff back. So, in this regard, she should take in different weapons. If you want to maintain the melee department, which I think you generally should, she should have a vibro sword. Those are basically what you're looking at every time they pull out a knife and it vibrates. It's a vibro knife. A vibro sword is just the same thing, but a sword. So, she's got the same range on that. You're good. But then, as an additional point, I would like to have her have a bunch of technical items. Things like rockets, maybe some whistling birds or whatnot. But give her a melee and technical setup, because she is an armorer and she would have the ability to use all of the various things. So having a bunch of throwing knives, that'd be great. She's able to remake all of her consumables because that's her primary job. And this will play into later fights and whatnot, but that's kind of what the setup for the armorer should be, I think. So next on the chopping block is going to be starfighter battles. And I mean all of them. I don't think I saw a single starfighter battle that I didn't want to change something on. I'll go over them in more detail, just because a lot of them have a lot of room for improvement, and just in general. But to note, I take issue with the use or lack thereof of proton torpedoes at almost every point in time. It's actually kind of funny how that gets screwed up every time. And now, as a final introductory note, I want to point out, as many people have noticed, Grogu doesn't have a whole lot to do in this season. He's kind of just hanging around and not doing a lot. So you'll notice that overall, I change his position a lot, and I basically have him stick with the Mandalorian children a lot more. And the general point of this is going to be so that he can have character development outside of Din Djarin. But we'll get into that a little more as we get to it. So, with all of that out of the way, let's begin with episode 1. So, for the very first episode, I think we need to address Gina Carano's leaving a little bit better. I don't think it's handled overly poorly, but I do think it can be improved. So, to this point, I would recommend having a different Marshal on Navarro, a character we haven't seen yet that is more or less, at best, average at their job. We're looking for someone that isn't great at being a Marshal, but is still technically a Marshal. The goal is to highlight how everyone we've been seeing up to this point is actually pretty good at their jobs. And with a more or less incompetent Marshal, you kind of point out that the pirates are able to kind of come in and they're like, hey, you're weak because you have a weak Marshal and you're just this high magistrate. And it's only having Mando here that really kind of saves your butt and whatnot. But later on, we're going to actually kill off this Marshal, so don't get too attached. To this end, we'll need a bit of a better explanation of what a Marshal is. And the best way to do this would be to effectively expand and say, okay, the Marshals of the New Republic aren't exactly employed by the New Republic, they're trained by the New Republic and then kind of sent out to independent systems who have requested them and basically paid a fee for their being taught. And so you could have a New Republic Marshal, you could have a First Order Marshal. Yes, I know, but you could have a First Order Marshal in theory. You could have any other, independently done one, like, say, a Corellian Marshal, since they're particularly known for being rebellious. But that will kind of sum up the changes of everything up to the Starfighter battle at the end of Episode 1. Now we get to the Starfighter battle. And in this regard, I don't particularly like how it's done because, for all intents and purposes, if you remember, the N1 under Din was made to be a speed craft, not a maneuverability craft. And this fight is effectively all about maneuverability. So I would like to change it up to be much more about speed, where Din Djarin just basically gasses it and is vanishing behind asteroids way off in the distance and using large ones and his speed to gain time to hide in the asteroid field, instead of trying to outmaneuver people and thus vanish. And it makes a lot more of those kind of sniping things where he just comes out of nowhere, takes one out, and then flies off. And that would be much better. I don't want to change the number of pirates, but I do want to knock out 2 of them with asteroids. This is to highlight the fact that asteroid fields are supposed to be dangerous, but it seems like everyone and their mother just kind of flies through it with no real issue. And this would be a good way to show off that, yes, an asteroid field is actually dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Other than that, I would change the forward blaster cannons on the N1 to be using individual shots as opposed to linked shots. That's better for tailing in a starfighter battle. This is just basic fighter combat. If you do a single heavy shot, you're going to miss more often. But if you do a bunch of light shots, only one of them has to get lucky and the enemy fighter goes down. So that's kind of the thing. The reasoning here being that you have these cannons that are now displayed, thus, in theory, more powerful than the previous ones. So you can get away with having one shot as opposed to two, like in the prequels. And as a final note, shoot 0 proton torpedoes in this fight. This is a fighter-to-fighter battle. This isn't fighter-to-bomber. This is interceptors fighting interceptors. Proton torpedoes take way too long to lock on and don't have sufficient speed to do this. It's really weird that he uses a proton torpedo when every time he lands a shot on a starfighter, it immediately dies. Why would you waste a consumable here? So, yeah. And after that, I don't have any real issue with the conversation between Din Djarin and Gorian Shard. That plays out just fine. Don't have any problems with it. That said, the final scene of episode 1 is Din Djarin landing at Castle Kryze, is what I'm calling it, on Sundari. This is in the Mandalorian system. And then in episode 2, he goes over to Tatooine at the beginning of the episode. So he goes all the way to the Mandalorian system to not ask permission. He's going anyways, and then leaves the Mandalorian system to go to Tatooine, and then goes back to the Mandalorian system. Why make the stop? Just switch the two scenes. Put the Tatooine scene at the end of episode 1, put Castle Kryze at the beginning of episode 2. Given that the timings here are close enough on each of them, you're not getting too much of a sway in the actual episode links, so you'll be fine here. So, into a little bit more of a point on the Tatooine scene, I would like to see the sales pitch for R5 go better. Specifically, add in a little bit more technobabble about the scanning capabilities from R5, so that way it's more of a proper sale instead of just trust me, buddy, because really, it's a little bit of a stretch there. Just a short addition to the conversation would improve it a great deal, I think. Now, to the next part, and the actual exploration of Mandalore. Once you get from Castle Kryze to Mandalore, because you're in the same system now. It has been pointed out that you don't actually need to go underground to identify whether or not the surface is habitable. That is very true. It is a little weird that R5 trundles off on his own. It isn't super weird that he trundles ahead, but it is weird that he does it while Mando's still in the cockpit. So, let R5 identify the immediate atmosphere is breathable, so that he can get set up with Grogu. They can kind of go along, and then they have R5 going in advance underground, because they know they need to go underground, and effectively they've scanned the surface, and then R5 is going to go underground, and Mando's going to kind of follow him in, because he knows it's not corrosive, and R5 is going to take some underground samples, while Mando waits at the front of the cave, basically. This lets you set up the hand-to-hand fight without having anything kind of particularly jarring in terms of sequencing now. After that, I think things go well until the trap, at which point I think Din Djarin gets trapped too easily. I get he's a Mandalorian, he's supposed to be a fighter, and that this scene does kind of need to happen to kick off the rest of the season, but he's also supposed to be a bounty hunter, and he would know a trap, or at least know how to avoid step 1 of the trap. Now, when dealing with an ambush predator, you basically walked into his lair, so, okay, I do accept that he needs to get trapped, but make it be a 2 or 3 stage trap. Let him get out of the first one on his own, and just because there's multiple stages, he gets trapped in a later stage. Now, after this, the retreat by Grogu and R5, because R5 should be retreating with Grogu at this point, because he should be waiting basically at the top of the cave instead of at the bottom of it and whatnot. And then so you have Grogu and R5 retreat together, they get to the N1, they get back to Castle Kryze and get Bo-Katan. All that goes along more or less the same, other than that one minor change just mentioned, and Bo-Katan goes to the rescue. So at this point, everything plays out basically the same until we get to the hand-to-hand fight scene with Bo-Katan. And I just want to reiterate again that I think some touch-up could be done here. Um, Basically speaking, it's kind of weird that she has 2 blasters, hits 0 people with them. Even though, yeah, it's okay. You should get disarmed so that you have a hand-to-hand fight scene. Um, but really, this needs to have a bit better choreography to make it more believable that she is actually in hand-to-hand combat here. And then we get to the quote at the very end of it, which is, "Did you think your dad was the only Mandalorian?" Really? Really, Grogu, who has seen multiple Mandalorians and was rescued by an entire sect of them at the end of season 1. Yes, that's the kid that doesn't believe that thinks his dad's the only Mandalorian? No, no, this is a dumb quote. Grogu would know this. I get you want the line, but no, you don't get this line. Get rid of it. After that, the rescue scene, again, bit of touch up on the choreography, but otherwise no major functional issues here. But then once you get after that, have the exploration take a little longer. Have Bo-Katan, while she knows where she's supposed to be heading, lose a little bit of the landmarks because everything is a bit of a bombed out mess now. So, effectively, the best way to write this would be for her to not know where she is right now, but to recognize a landmark at some point and to basically say, oh, this is an important monument, or this was my home, I can see it. No need to go back in there because I'm over it or whatever. Or maybe this is the entrance to the capital. It's like, I know the entrance to the capital. I know where we're at. Now I know how to get to the Living Waters. So this just gives you a bit more time with Bo-Katan and Din Djarin, have a little bit more character development there, and not have it be quite so Bo-Katan ex machina going on here, And then at the end of that, the basically Din Djarin rebaptizing himself. I don't mind that he takes off all of his weapons and his jetpack because it's a ritual thing for him. And you can, if you really want to, you can have him mention, it's like, hey, why are you doing that? It's part of the cleansing. But that, I don't think that's super necessary to say. But I would like to see him have a bit more like a feeble struggle at the bottom, because he does kind of pass out really quickly. He's flat out, has nothing going on, and having a minorly feeble struggle at the bottom would be a good way to show that he's not quite out yet. So my final critique of the episode is the mythosaur. And it's not that it exists, because believe me, I do like it's there. It's a great touch. But I dislike that it's effectively asleep, and I would like to see it more of a, basically, swim by, effectively, because it is supposed to be land-based, and having it sleeping at the bottom of the pool is a little weird of a choice for that kind of an animal. And now to get to episodes 3 and 4. So to start off with, I'm actually going to be combining these into a single episode. This is mostly because the Dr. Pershing part of episode 3 is not particularly useful to the plot. So I'm going to end up cutting it up, and then we're going to shorten up episode 4 so that this can all fit into one. So to start with, the first thing that I don't like is when Din Djarin says that interceptors are tougher than TIE fighters, and no, they're more agile. But a TIE interceptor is effectively stripping off everything in favor of handing the pilot maximum control. So they are not tougher, but they are definitely faster and much more agile. So I would change that phrasing to be that. Next up, everything's good until the starfighter stall immediately after Din Djarin gets into the N1. And alright, I get it. Everybody likes to reference World War II in space, but you can't get a stall to work without a counter stall. Basically, the entire idea is that you stall out after the guy chasing you stalls out, so he falls down and then you can fall down right behind him. This doesn't work in a starfighter. They can just keep going into space. So no. Just have Din outmaneuver the TIE Interceptor and don't destroy it with a torpedo. That is vastly overkill for a TIE Interceptor. No. Other than that, overall for the starfighter battle, I'm okay with how Bo-Katan works, but I'm not really okay with how Din works, because he keeps shooting TIEs and then getting in line with them. And why would you do that? If you're already on their tail, just stay on their tail and keep shooting them. Secondly, those TIEs should split off the minute they know that Din Djarin's still in the fight. So this should turn into more of a 1-on-3 twice, as opposed to a one running away from 6, and then another one chasing along. The next point of contention here is that the single bombing run from the TIE bombers does an awful lot of damage to Castle Kreese. This is supposed to be a fortress. If you could have them run over it a second time, that'd be great. But other than that, it ends pretty much fine. I don't have any real issues with the ending other than that. I'm okay with Bo-Katan shooting a missile at the bombers. They are at a bit more range than normal, so shooting one out would be just fine there. And I would like to point out this is about the only time that I think a proton torpedo or concussion missile of any kind is used correctly in a starfighter battle in Season 3. Like, I don't get how those are always used wrong. But not here. Here's good. And as a final note for the Mandalorian system in this particular episode, the distance between Mandalore and Sundari is actually really short. So being able to kind of see them on the same area in the sector, if you look at the map that Din shows to Grogu, their orbits are abnormally close. And this is explainable by just saying, hey, right now they're particularly close together. But if you were over in the Corellian system, this wouldn't hold together. But that's more of a minor nitpick than anything real major. Now, as for the Dr. Pershing portion of this episode, I'm going to start off by saying I'm going to cut a lot of it out. But I will be keeping parts of it, just not in this episode. So what's going to happen is I'm going to split Dr. Pershing's episode into 3 smaller parts and then leave the rest of it out. And I'm going to sprinkle the 3 parts throughout the rest of the series. So you're going to hear what the 3 parts are now. I'll name them split 1, 2, and 3. And I'll just say insert split 1, 2, or 3 later on in the series. So first off, we're going to split for Dr. Pershing at the opening scene for that. So the clone speech, go all the way to the start of him getting in the cab. That's going to be split number 1. It's a good little subsection. And then for split 2, we're going to have it be the cab pickup to when Dr. Pershing receives the travel biscuits. Because that's it's a good little subsection, and it gets some character development. It gets Elia Kane in there, and that's a good little thing there. And then for number 3, we're going to pick up where he's at the workplace, and we're going to go into his first interview, where he's saying, yes, I'm doing fine here. Everything's good. And that's going to be the last of the 3 splits. We're going to leave the rest of it for a different series, because having the rest of the Dr. Pershing episode just doesn't really benefit Season 3 of The Mandalorian, and we really just want to keep him in the mind of viewers. But other than that, he doesn't really have a presence or a need to be here. And the rest of the episode, I think, hurts Elia Kane's character, and I'll get more into that later. So from here, we have the meeting with the rest of the Mandalorians. That's good. Leave that in. Don't have anything really to complain about there. Nothing to really change either. Next up is we're going to then continue into Episode 4. But remember, at this point, we're still in Episode 3 of the rework. It's just Episode 4 of the mainline series. So all of the setup to the Raptor grabbing Ragnar, all that's fine. We're going to just keep that kind of as is. And then the flight for the Mandalorians chasing Ragnar, we're going to change this because any hunting party that is sent after Ragnar the way it is too late. By the time they get to that nest, Ragnar is already dead. It's a hunting predator. It has young to feed. He's already been dead and fed by the time they actually reach him in Season 3. So we're going to be changing that, and we're going to be speeding that up. In order to do this, we're going to have, during the flight, the Mandalorians are going to get ahead of Bo-Katan on flight, and they're going to get after the Raptor. But as they start to get low on fuel, Bo-Katan's going to come, and she's just going to pick them up mid-flight. And we're going to be using that lack of fuel as a thing in the battle later on. So what this is going to mean is that all of the Mandalorians that were chasing the Raptor are now part of an impromptu hunting party after the Raptor. And they're trying to take it down before it can get back to its home and before anything else, because that's the only real chance they've got to save Ragnar. To this metric, we're going to have Paz's line of saying, he's my son. That's going to be moved to being when Paz jumps out of the gauntlet. Not the plane, but the gauntlet. And he's going to say this, and he's going to jump out prematurely before they're ready because he's very anxious. That is his son, and he's ready to go. After that, it's going to be a fight in the sky. You know, the other Mandalorians will lose their fuel, as well as some of the other stuff. But basically, you're just going to have the fight go fairly similarly to what it's going on, but with more of the Mandalorians hanging on to the raptor than normal. And then they'll land the gauntlet and pick up the little raptorlings, and they'll just take them back to camp. All that's going to stay pretty the same. Now, as for Grogu's flashback, we're going to be taking that out, and we're going to be relocating it. So we will not have Grogu's flashback in this episode, but it will be there later. And then after the fight, the cleanup, all that's going to stay the same. And now we move on to the next episode, which will be episode 4 in the rework. This is going to be the Siege on Navarro. We're going to start this with, I think, Elias Kane really pulls her weight here. She does an excellent job of being what's effectively the uncanny valley of facial expressions, and I don't want to waste that by shoveling answers down the viewers' throats. This is why we stopped at Split 3, because her just look, she's just kind of creepy. And having that look and at the front where you're like, she's playing in something, but I don't know what it is. And now you've got that, and you've got a bit of interference, and then you go over later into the Pershing stuff, and it's going to be like, wait a minute, is she trying to, mess with Pershing, or is she trying to vet him? And you leave that up in the air, and it gives your viewers something to engage with that character specifically. And again, I cannot stress enough, that actress is just absolutely pulling her weight here. She's doing a wonderful job with that expression. So the setup for the Siege on Navarro is going to be pretty similar. We're going to start it off with Grief Karga is going to have filed a secession movement from the New Republic, basically saying, hey, we used to be under some of your purview, and now we're going to kind of back off. You're free to, visit us, but we're not under your purview anymore. And then after that, pretty much immediately as the Marshal's about to leave, the pirates attack, and they will kill off the Marshal. Basically just to emphasize that he really wasn't that useful. And then after that, we're going to go over to Teva and Colonel Tuttle. And Teva and Colonel Tuttle is going to play out pretty much the same. The only change is going to be the rejection is based upon a lack of ship power and not a lack of just pure assets, because we're going to effectively say that the New Republic has enough money to do stuff, but doesn't have the ships or manpower to actually do them. And that'll come into play a bit later. The next section is going to be Paz Vizsla's speech. Everything in between there is fine. I do think Paz could use some rework here. Mostly just improvement. He does okay, but he's trying too hard, basically. It's trying too hard to say that Paz is going to be, no, we're not doing this. And that really undercuts his abilities there. In my regards to this, I think a good way to have this would be to have some of the Mandalorians get a little too ready and all right, we're done here, we're clearly not doing this, and kind of start to walk off. And basically have Paz turn it around and say, no, we are Mandalorians, it is in our souls to fight, it is honorable to die defending our clan. And we have a chance to make a better life for the clan, so let's do that. We know, Din, you're fighting for a friend, but we're fighting for the clan. We're fighting on the promise that we will have a home to go to. And that's where I think that speech should be centered on. But again, I don't think the speech is so bad that it has to be reworked if there just isn't time for it. The next point I want to add in here is the goal of the Mandalorian attack. The goal currently is to clear them out of the city and destroy the ship, and I don't like that. I think they should be capturing the Corsair. You can destroy all the snub fighters, but that Corsair is ripe for a Mandalorian infantry assault. It has a hangar deck right on top. The gauntlet can just airdrop both squads at once right onto it, and they can take that ship, and I don't see why they don't do this. So, we're changing the goal. They are going to capture the Corsair and not clear the town like they do right now. Now, again, as a side note here, we're going to not have Grogu in this section, because having him in the fighter during this dogfight is not really conducive to his position as a foundling. This will get more clear later on as we work in some more Grogu stuff, but for now, just kind of understand that he's going to be separated from Din a lot. Now, as for the actual beginning of the engagement, in this battle, the N1 is mostly done as saying, hey, it's highly maneuverable, but that's not what it was built as. It was built as speed, and this is a good way to lure the fighters away from the Corsair, and that's what should be kind of going on here, where Din's basically running maximum speed the entire time, and just outrunning them and drawing them away from the city, and the snub fighters away from the Corsair as a result. And then eventually, when he goes into the what's totally not Beggar's Canyon and flies through the canyon, that's when the Comrade class fighter transport, also known as a Gauntlet, is going to come in. So this whole time, we're going to have the Gauntlet kind of just hanging out behind a couple of hills, and once they're ready to go, Bo-Katan's just going to fly right over the top and airdrop a bunch of Mandalorians straight onto the hangar deck. Because it is a perfect runway, they have the best setup for it, and they're just going to jetpack right onto that, and they're going to start trying to take the ship while it's not over the city. Now, to that matter, I'd like to point out that a lot of this has kind of an ebb and a flow with the way that the pacing of the fighting works, and the pacing can be kept on the inside of the ship, with the two primary objectives being taking the lower turrets and taking the bridge. So when you have like the section where Paz comes in and he's just gunning down pirates, that's Paz taking the lower section of the ship. And when you have the armorer coming to help and whatnot, that can be the armorer going straight to the bridge, and she's got a vibro sword there, and she's fighting the captain on the bridge. So, yeah. That said, I will point out that after the initial kind of success where I don't think they should take the bridge right away, that should be kind of the final statement. But after an initial success on the boarding thing, the pirates should send up 3 shuttles of additional reinforcements. Of these 3 shuttles, 2 should make it. The other 2 should get, or one of them should get shot down by Din Djarin or Bo-Katan, whichever one's nearest at the time, so likely Bo-Katan. And after that, once the Corsair is taken, the Corsair is used to cause the pirates on the ground to surrender, because at this point, they've been ordered to go hunt down all the remaining settlers who are off the wastelands. And if anyone wants to know why they're not in the wastelands and not fighting, it's because at this point, Grief would be a bad magistrate if he couldn't get anyone away, effectively. So he does the thing that he does, where he goes and runs off, and they're at that point then told, hey, go find the settlers. If we kill them, the Mandalorians won't have anything to fight for us. But they have no reason to come after us. But that's all kind of neither here nor there. The shuttle should be used in place of like the blaster cannon being put down, so that way they get pinned on both sides. But, fight choreography that in a good way. That's the best way to put that. So, and then from here, even though we're going to move into where the armorer talks to Bo-Katan, kind of off the side, tells you to go unite the clans. That part's good. What I don't like is Bo-Katan being told to remove her helmet. I think she shouldn't be told to remove her helmet at this point. She should still keep it on and still be a part of the clan in the same traditional ways at this point in time. After that, you have Bo-Katan being asked to go reunite the clan, so she's going to go off and do that. And then from here, we're going to cut to Pershing Split 1. So if you remember, we split up episode 3 a bunch, and we had 3 splits for Pershing. We're going to do Pershing Split 1 here. And then after the first Pershing split, we're going to end on Captain Teva's discovery, which is him in an X-Wing discovering that Gideon's free. Now, for our astute observers, they will notice that we now have a Corsair to deal with that we didn't have to deal with before. So, that's going to be the next episode. This is going to be episode 5. What do we do with this Corsair? So to start this episode, we're going to have it open up on a discussion of what to do with this Corsair. It's here, you got to handle it, but that also means the Mandalorians are in possession of a Corsair they didn't have before, so what are they going to do? So we're going to have this discussion between the Major Mandalorians, Grief Karga, Captain Teva, and Colonel Tuttle. Noticeably absent is going to be Elia Kane, which is, if y'all remember, the spy that we're hiding for the time being. So, before the meeting, the Mandalorians are going to decide that they don't want to keep the Corsair. It's too much shit for them. Their clan's just not able to operate the thing efficiently. So, they're going to be looking for a scrapper to buy it, take it off their hands, and just leave them with a bunch of money for it. So, we're going to have Grief Karga suggest the New Republic, specifically the Delphi Squadron, specifically Captain Teva, because he knows that Teva's been looking for a more rescue ship, and this would be a very good rescue ship. It's got a hangar, it's got plenty of cargo space, it's able to make hyperspace jumps, so it's a good rescue ship, and the suggestion is that a Delphi Squadron will buy it off of them. So they're going to, start the transmission with Captain Teva, they're going to say, hey, we have a Corsair we're looking to offload. Would you be willing to buy this? So Captain Teva is going to really like the idea, but also think he may not be able to because the New Republic wasn't able to provide assistance to Navarro already, and it's not like there's been a major shift in events, so why would they have more assets now? But he's willing to give it a shot with Colonel Tuttle, and he's going to try and give Tuttle a call, and this time Tuttle will actually pick up. So now we've got the discussion going on. We've got our three major Mandalorians, Din Djarin, Bo-Katan, and the armor, along with Grief Karga, Captain Teva, and Colonel Tuttle on the same holocall. And we're going to sell this ship to the New Republic. And what's going to happen is they're going to go in and say, hey, we have a ship now that we're looking to sell. And Tuttle's going to be a little confused. He's like, wait, you have a ship? I thought you were under attack. And their response will be, yeah, we stole their ship and we're not under attack anymore. Would you like their ship? So Captain Teva is going to take over here and give a short explanation to Colonel Tuttle. He's like, hey, this would be an excellent rescue ship. We have good guns. We can come in. We can take out any pirate attack straight from above, a full decapitating strike, and then rescue any civilians we need to. Minor refits would all would need, and we'd be good to go. Can we have the funds to buy this? And so Colonel Tuttle is going to ask, well, what's the price? Obviously I'm not just going to throw money at you. So they're going to, name a price, however much you want. The actual finances are irrelevant, but we're going to end up with them only being able to fund 75% of the ship. And that's going to be Tuttle's response. He's like, hey, we're only able to allocate you 75% of these funds. We can't give you the rest. So unless the Mandalorians are willing to come down with it, there's nothing we can do. We're sorry. So at this point, there's a bit of an impasse, and everyone's kind of mulling over what to do with the ship now, because if the New Republic can't buy it, they're going to have to find a scrapper, at which point Captain Teva will actually come up with another suggestion, which is, well, what if we can't pay you in credits, but we can pay you in labor? And the Mandalorian's going to ask, how's that going to work? No real offense to the people of the Delphi Squadron, but what can you do that Mandalorians can't? And the answer is, well, we can fix up Navarro. So, technically speaking, we're not selling our labor to you, we're selling it to Grief Karga. He will be funding the final quarter directly to the Mandalorians in exchange for us helping fix up Navarro and all of the things that are busted up around. So we'll have kind of in the background, a Delphi Squadron help fix things up. And this will fly over very well, so Colonel Tuttle will agree, and they'll have, it's like, all right, we're going to have 3/4 of the payment sent to a Delphi Squadron. The Mandalorians will come pick it up from them, and the final quarter will be given to you by Grief Karga, who is going to be paying for the expertise of a Delphi Squadron in helping fix up Navarro. So now that we have all of the funds in the right place, they need to be transported to Navarro. And anyone that's paying attention will note that there's only one true transport left in this particular situation, and that's Bo-Katan's gauntlet. So, Bo-Katan's going to put off going to unite the Mandalorian clans in exchange for going and retrieving the funds for the Corsair so that the payments can be properly rendered, and then they can hand over the ship. So, this will involve Bo-Katan, Din Djarin, and Paz. We're not going to take the armor because she should stick behind with the rest of the group, and notably, we are not taking Grogu on this mission. So at this point, while the 3 Mandalorians are en route to a Delphi base, then we're going to have Grogu's flashback here. So he's going to stick behind with the armor. The hammer scene's going to play out pretty much the exact same way. It's a good scene. Love it. Leave it just right there as is. Good little space hammer. So after Grogu's flashback, we're going to have, during the away mission, Bo-Katan's going to end up talking to Zeb because arguably she should know Zeb at this point because Sabine. And so we're going to have her talk to Zeb, and there's going to be a name drop for Sabine in the conversation. But the main takeaway from this conversation is that Bo-Katan will realize she needs the Darksaber to unite the Mandalorian clans. Effectively speaking, this is Zeb saying, I understand you want to lead, but knowing what I know about Clan Ren, they won't follow you without the Darksaber. And she's like, all right, well, I'm going to need that. That's true. You're right. But other than that, the transport to and from goes without any real issue. And they get back, and Bo-Katan will challenge Din Djarin for ownership of the Darksaber. This is an important part of this step because for everyone who's watched the Clone Wars, they will realize that the grand issue with the Darksaber is not getting it, it's keeping it. Well, if you've watched Rebels, you know that too. Effectively speaking, it's easy enough to get the Darksaber, you kill one person. The problem is once you have it, everybody wants to kill you to get the Darksaber. So now we have Bo-Katan challenging Din Djarin to a fight. This is going to go fairly poorly for Din, mostly because he's not effective with the Darksaber. But that said, he will successfully destroy her helmet, even though she wins the fight. So this means overall, Bo-Katan has the Darksaber, but is now an apostate again. So Children of the Watch are going to kick her out again. And that's her current status. So she's leaving in disgrace. However, she will have a few of the Children of the Watch join her. Mostly because, they see the Darksaber like, alright, you're going to unite the Mandalorian clans. We would rather join you than remain here. It's an important step for highlighting how important the Darksaber is. And then end the episode on Pershing Split 2. And for everyone who doesn't remember Pershing Split 2, that is the start of the cab ride all the way to when he gets the travel biscuits. So now we get to what I call episode 5.5, the clans. This episode can be inserted or removed depending upon budgetary restraints. Effectively speaking, if you think you're going to run out of budget by the end of the season, this is the episode you cut. If not, put it in. The plot of this particular one is just Bo-Katan running around recruiting Mandalorians. So, the first clan she finds isn't particularly large, but she waves the Darksaber and they join right up. And they're going to bring with them a Crusader gunship and a pair of assault craft or gunships, which for this one I'd like to pick a pair of U-wings, though that can be changed if for whatever reason the U-wing is considered undesirable. At this point, the first clan is sent to join the main fleet. So their Crusader and their U-wing, you'll get a nice little short little screen there of just them joining the main fleet and Grief watching them come in. So the second clan she finds isn't going to be as big as the Night Owls, so still a more minor clan, but it's also not going to be quite willing to join just because she's got the Darksaber out. But her possession of it does immediately grant her an audience and a chance to prove that she is worthy of being followed. This chance is given in the form of a raid on an Imperial supply convoy. Her job is to take out the defenses, which won't be too big, but she has to do it alone, and after that, the clan will join in and help take over the convoy. So, kind of the twist on this particular raid is that, for whatever reason, you can call it Rhydonium or whatever, they're not allowed to use ion weapons on the ship because doing so would detonate it. And since it's going to be ambushed during a hyperspace route, it's likely to flee and your window for attack isn't terribly big, especially noting that Mandalorians don't have access to interdiction. So, Bo-Katan and her two new clans will succeed. They will take the cargo ship, but it is going to make a jump, so they're going to have to drop it out of hyperspace, turn it around, and come back. This won't be too big of a deal. Just, a bit more time for her to have some chatties with the rest of the clans. Give her some character development, basically. Now, unlike the last time Mandalorians hijacked a ship, they're going to get to keep this one because it's nice and good for ferrying cargo around. And, also troops if necessary. So, they're going to keep this ship, and they're also going to bring in either another Crusader gunship or a Raider 1 stolen from Imperials. Again, both for the same reason, this is just more Starfighter defense for the fleet. Now we get to Episode 6, which is the recruitment of the Night Owls. It's going to begin with the same privateer scene. We're going to keep that full-on good scene. So Bo-Katan's going to try and just make this a holocall. Just call Axelwolf, say, hey, I'm going to go take Mandalore. You're going to come with me. And he's like, no, up yours. You don't have the Darksaber, leave. And just flat out hangs up at that point. No chance to respond. So now Bo-Katan knows she's going to have to go there, show them the Darksaber, and actually say, hey, you are my clan, follow me. So to do that, she needs a witness. She's going to call Din Djarin and say, hey, I need you to come with me to come recruit these Night Owls. And just give him kind of the rundown and say, you're acting as my witness. So here, Bo-Katan's going to go back to the Night Owls, but she's going to take a small portion of the fleet. Just a couple fighters, not enough to provoke the Night Owls into thinking she's going to, perform a raid, but she is trying to invade Mandalore. She is going to be the leader of the Mandalorians. It doesn't make sense for her to not have an escort, effectively. So she is going to take a small escort with her. Again, just a couple fighters. Now, as a side note here, before we get into the whole thing, I want to point out it's really odd that Grogu gets along immediately with the nobility. I know it's done so that he can be taken out of the situation and the episode can happen without him. If that's the case, just leave him on Navarro. Don't bring him at all and use that as character development for Din and say, hey, your kid's not here and you're not happy about it, but you don't know why, because ultimately speaking, it isn't his job. And that's kind of what he is. This is the way for Grogu to stay home and learn culture. But Din isn't happy about it. So, and that's just going to be something that we're kind of going to leave around there for a little bit, and we'll come back to it later. Din's not happy, Grogu's not with him. Anytime this occurs, that should at least be hinted at. Now, as for the actual mission, it's going to go, for the most part, unchanged in the droid area. We're going to have Din be a bit more aggressive, and also they're going to pick up Casca Reeves and a random Night Owl who are kind of on leave, just walking through the city. Now, they are going to have standing orders to basically challenge Bo-Katan on site, because she shouldn't be there, and she's not their leader, and she's obviously coming to, kick off acts, so he's like, no, you see her, you fight her, but they're on leave, and they're like, we're supposed to fight you, but it's our day off, so we're not going to. So for this part of the story, we're just going to kind of have the Night Owls observing Bo-Katan and seeing how she acts and what's going on, and overall, this will convince Casca Reeves that Bo-Katan is still a worthy leader, even if she doesn't have the Darksaber. Although she does, and that just isn't blatantly obvious to them right now, because it is a little hidden. I'd also like to add in some banter with Casca about Axe being very unhappy that she's going to be there. You're going to show up, and he is not going to be pleased about this. So that'll wrap up the droid section, and as another aside, I would like to address that there's suggestions that Jack Black would make a good Zinj. Personally, I don't mind this, but if it's going to be supported later in the story, he needs to have a much stronger presence here, as much more of a dominant factor in all the conversations, instead of Lizzo, because it wouldn't make sense for an Imperial warlord to start playing second fiddle. So, now we get to Bo-Katan meets Axe Woves. And this is going to go initially the same, where she goes up, it's like, hey, I have the Darksaber, and then pulls it out from its little hiding place. And then he's going to, except this time, Axe is going to say, I don't care if you have the Darksaber, you have your friend who is lying for you, you did not earn that, I'm going to challenge you for the right to have it. Again, this is because the hardest part about the Darksaber is not getting it, it's keeping it. So, we're going to have Bo-Katan win this. Obviously, anyone that doesn't see that coming a mile away is wrong. And then from here, she's going to demand, it's like, hey, you're going to make me a new helmet, and I would not accept another helmet because you are my clan. I will only wear a helmet from the Night Owls. And then there is a weak speech from Din Djarin that we are entirely dropping and replacing with Pershing Split 3. And again, for anyone who doesn't remember what Split 3 was, this is where we pick up from him at the workplace all the way to his first interview, where he's kind of, bored out of his mind, doesn't really appreciate what's going on, but does like being able to work. So now we get to episode 7. And we are not going to start with a call to Moff Gideon from Elia Kane, revealing that she's a spy, because, again, spies work best when you aren't 100% certain they're spies. So we're just going to skip right into the Shadow Council. That said, there's not going to be any major changes to the Shadow Council, because it works real well. The intro for the Mandalorians isn't going to change a whole lot, because it is a good intro, and we're just going to add in the 2 extra clans just kind of walking up after that first stare down. They just landed further away. I would like to point out a wasted opportunity of Grief Karga walks up, yells out Mando, and for some unknown reason doesn't have about 100 Mandalorians turn and stare at him instantly. Like, seriously, guys, that's a great spot to put some humor. Let's have that. He calls Mando, all the Mandalorians stare at him, and he's like, that one. I'd also like to point out that Grogu having a mech suit is fun. Yes, those are very funny, but he doesn't need it. So we're gonna be taking that away because it's just too much interference at this point for no real benefit since we're not taking him with us on the mission. Next, make sure the department, whoever does the animation, keeps track of how many ships are where. That count changes way too often. It's okay for it to happen once, maybe twice, but I think it happens about 5 or 6 times. That's not acceptable. No, keep track of your ships, people. Other than that, keep everything pretty much the same, even down to the scouting party for the most part. Do add in some of the extra clan just as a further way to diversify your portfolio. But that scouting party is way too tight. They are within like 20 feet of each other. Just spread them out some more, because really that's just taking a step back with the camera. And then I'd like to point out that Bo-Katan says Night Owls, they say flanking left, and then take 2 steps forward and left to crouch behind a rock and have done 0 flanking. Not one bit of flanking has occurred here. That is no flank. Then generally continue with the same process. This episode does come off pretty good, so we're not going to change a whole lot for this conversations, but do remove Bo-Katan admitting to surrendering, because this is a scouting mission. They are in enemy territory. Do not make that admission just yet. At all. Period. No. So I would like to make an aside here about Grogu being on Mandalore, because flat out it doesn't make sense. Even with a mech suit, this is a kid who has shown a propensity to go fuck off and do whatever he wants, just whenever, not controllable. Why are you taking him on a scouting mission with sheer level of planning? You have a small flotilla with you. This does not make sense. Why is Grogu here? It's one thing for Din to take him with him. He doesn't have anywhere really to stash the kid, so alright, you go with it. But there is an entire fleet here. There are other kids who are obviously in some other location. Grogu should be with them. On the bright side, this means you get to have Grogu and Ragnar interact in a way that should hopefully endear you more to both, but specifically you're aiming to endear people to Ragnar at this point, because we are still killing Paz. And that's going to be extra stabby, and we do want to stab it. And then let's have, when Gideon walks up and says, "Thank you for gathering all the Mandalorians in one place," you cannot convince me to believe these are even most of the Mandalorians. You have had thousands of years in Star Wars time. You have a planet based upon a warrior culture that is fully willing to go nomad on several occasions. This is a flotilla. Even crushed by the Empire, I cannot reasonably believe this is most of the Mandalorians. I can't. I'm sorry. And if it is, how do they plan to repopulate that planet? There's really not that many of them, to be honest, people. From here, I'd like to say that the monologue he goes on is a bit odd, because he is a spy. He's going to know that these are super commandos, and he should probably just deal with them instead of monologuing at them. Though, that said, I can, let him get away with a monologue, megalomaniac and all that. But it is extremely odd that his only plan for dealing with super commandos is to throw soldiers at them. That thing they're really good at dealing with. I don't care how good your soldiers are. This is a spy. He is not going to just throw troops at this. Use traps. Hopefully some explosives. Probably use some cryo traps as well, which just means freezing them to death, basically. That'd be great. And here we want to have Gideon reveal that Bo-Katan surrendered, because that has a better impact than Bo-Katan admitting it. Now, that said, moving on to Paz fighting the 3 Praetorian guards, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for Paz to go down to all 3 of them without doing any real damage to those guys, and then having Din take out all 3 of them. I get it, there was a fight beforehand, and they're trying to make it act like Paz is tired and exhausted, but that he's been shooting a gun. He hasn't been running around. Like, this is... No. Paz needs to take down one of the guards with him. If you need to bump the number up to 4 to make you feel better, fine. But if it's going to be 3 guards, Paz needs to take one with him. Hopefully by grabbing the dude and jumping off the cliff, because that's just metal. So, moving on to episode 8, and at the start of it, there is a quote saying, use the cattle ship as a decoy, we can't beat them in the air, and nothing convinces me of this. Not even counting my reworks, and them having better anti-starfighter capability. No. Just flat out, their normal fleet, I have no reason to believe they can't beat those starfighters, period, at all. So we're going to resolve that by giving the Imperials a Vindicator, as well as a couple of smaller ships, probably a pair of Raiders, or a Raider and 1 Architons. This is just so that there's an actual fleet engagement that can occur. You don't have to see most of it, since a lot of it's going to be shield slugging. Though, that said, the overall tempo of this is going to be that the Mandalorians are on the defensive, and they're going to realize that they're outgunned because the Vindicator does have more power than the command cruiser they've got, and they're going to call for help. So, even though they can take care of the fighters next to the Architons, they're going to be on the run, and no real way to deal with the Vindicator. And what's going to happen here is at the end of the episode, we're going to get some reinforcements. Now, not to belabor the point, but on the ground, Grogu shouldn't be there. Why he saves Din doesn't make sense, because he shouldn't be here in the first place. Use Casca or one of the scavenger Mandalorians to save him instead. In order to explain this, use the traps to separate the Mandalorians. One of them will be going to save Din, thanks to the traps moving them in the right direction. So at this point, Bo-Katan has run off, taken all the Mandalorians, gone off and gone to retreat. And I don't like the time frame on this because it is basically 10 seconds of screen time. If they go, they sit in a pool, they talk for 10 seconds, and they go back in. And that is not a proper retreat. We're going to expand this in episode time by having the space battle take place. So what we want to use this time for, though, is we also want to make sure that Bo-Katan can handle the fact that Gideon revealed she surrendered properly. Even if the Children of the Watch may not particularly care a whole lot, the Night Owls and the Scavengers will. So she is going to need to address that. So this is where she's going to address it. Because she's got the time, and it gives them time to kind of have an emotional wind down. So, again, just to rehash, it's going to start with a Starfighter attack. The Mandalorians will successfully repel it because they have a lot of anti-Starfighter capability, but they will be not able to handle that Vindicator in any fashion because it just outguns them that badly. Now, this shouldn't be done by having all the fighters destroyed, just a significant portion of them, and the rest are then kept in reserve for defense, so that any Mandalorian attack is instantly hit by interceptors, as well as that Raider, and then the Architons is there for extra fire support. At this point, the Mandalorians will basically turn tail and be fast enough to be out of the Vindicator's range, but aren't willing to retreat. So you kind of have a standstill where they don't do anything, and the Mandalorians call for assistance. It's going to be a general call, but it will get picked up by Grief Karga, courtesy of one of the other Mandalorians. And, what I mean by general call is they're going to be a call on Mandalorian channels. So this will bring us back down to the ground fight, and they're going to restart their infiltration. The first thing I want to point out here is we have an R5 Ex Machina. He just shows up. I know he was on the ground team initially, but this dude just shows up, doesn't exist for most of it, and then just kind of does. We're going to resolve this Ex Machina by having him come. He'll be along for the whole infiltration, but at the first ambush, he's going to scamper right off because he's scared. And then he just gets it back together, comes in, has his scene. Then after this, do remember that you have 2 Mandalorians. You need to at least double the number of shield guards, maybe make it 5. Just because it's 2 Mandos, they can work together, but you have the same fist fight down the shielded hallway. Good little scene there. Excellent job. As a side note here, why does Gideon keep taking off his helmet? Because, every scene we keep seeing him, he keeps taking his helmet off, and his voice is nowhere near intimidating. And, dude, Esposito, you're doing a great job. You are not personally intimidating. Like, you got too much gray hair for this. Keep your helmet on. Keep the helmet voice. You have much more intimidation factor with that. Keep that on. Now, back to what I was saying about the Praetorian Guards, and you should probably stack that up to 4 if you want to. Yeah, we're gonna do that here because what I forgot to remember was that we have 2 Mandalorians now. We have Mando +1, so this is gonna be a 2 Mandalorians versus 3 Praetorian Guard situation because we don't have Grogu anymore. So yeah, 3v2. So at this point, we've got most of the rest of the episode is unchanged other than what I said. So we have the general Mandalorian assault happening on the base. We have Mando +1 in a fight against 3 Praetorian Guards. This is where all the kind of sorrowful music, yeah, totally, someone could die here goes on. And we're going to zoom back out to the space battle. And we're going to have reinforcements start coming in the form of individual Mandalorian fighter squadrons. And they're not going to bring anything major, just random things, maybe bring in some uglies, couple of Fang fighters, just some random small number of ships, but nothing major. This will, however, eventually stack up to the point that Axe thinks he can take the Vindicator, and he's going to order an assault. And unfortunately for Axe, he is wrong, and they're going to get pretty savaged by that thing, because a Vindicator is not to be taken lightly. And right about when you think it's going to get blown up, you're going to have a final call come in that says, "This is a Delphi squadron. We heard you had Imperials." They're going to drop out with their brand new Corsair. It's going to be renamed to something like the Space Runner or something like that. I'm bad with names, okay, people? I'm sorry. I'm bad with naming things. They're going to drop out with their Corsair. They're going to come in right behind it with a full squadron of X-Wings, a full squadron of Y-Wings, and a Corsair, and they're going to just savage that Vindicator because it is looking the wrong way to be dealing with that. And it's going to go down real hard thanks to that. At this point, the surviving Raider and Architans are just going to hyperspace away because they don't think they can take this, and they're just going to chicken out. So to add in from here, I do want to point out that there's a hilarious quote from Max Wolves when he's going down. And we're still going to have him go down, but he has this hilarious quote of, "I'm going to take out the base." And if anybody else noticed, he literally only hits the docks. It doesn't do any structural damage to anything other than a couple of dots. Like, this dude says, "I'm going to take out the base," and promptly misses the entire base. We're not changing that, but yeah, take out that quote. Just have him take out the docks, say, "I'm going to take out the docks," have him take out the docks, and not have him say, "take out the base," because it's just stupid. That's a stupid quote. And then the cut over to the fight with Mando and Bo-Katan against Gideon. When Gideon, the only thing I really want to change about this is Gideon destroys the Darksaber. And I don't like that. Because this is a side episode. It isn't something, if you know, again, what you know about the Darksaber, it's a very important cultural artifact. Save its destruction for Thrawn. Part of Thrawn is that he makes excellent tactical decisions. Save the Darksaber's destruction for later, because that's great. Thrawn taking out the Darksaber and causing a succession crisis is extremely top tier Thrawn. And I would live for that. Why are you taking that from me? Other than that, the wrap-up goes really well. Of course, we do have to, again, account for Grogu not being there, so you're going to have to hide properly as Mandalorians and not just use Grogu's force powers to not die again. But other than that, on the wrap-up, it's great. But when they start chanting for Mandalore, that is not the Mandalorian chant. The Mandalorian chant is just Mandalore. So it's just Mandalore, Mandalore, and that's it. And that's the end of it. That is the end of my rework of episode 3. I hope everyone was able to follow along. I understand that sometimes I can be difficult to keep track of. So if you're still listening at this 1 hour and 4 minute mark, dude, I'm impressed. You have listened to me ramble for a very long time. Thank you. I do appreciate it. Y'all have a good night.